Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Welcome to Watch This Space. I'm the NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, and we have a lot of really exciting things to share today. The video you just watched was a video of some of America's finest, and in fact, some of Canada's finest. These are our new generation of astronauts. We call them astronaut candidates. And today we're going to have an opportunity to meet them. But know this. NASA is on the brink of doing some amazing things. We are, for the first time since 2011, on the precipice of launching American astronauts from American soil on American rockets. This hasn't been done since the retirement of the space shuttle. And next year, we're going to do just that. And these astronauts are going to go to the International Space Station on what we call commercial crew. In other words, NASA isn't purchasing, owning, and operating these rockets as we have in the past. NASA is buying a service from our commercial crew providers, in this case, SpaceX and Boeing, and the Boeing vehicle will be launching on a United Launch Alliance rocket. So this is an exciting time. The idea being we can drive down cost and increase access when NASA is one customer of many customers with providers that are competing on cost and innovation in low Earth orbit. So this is exciting for the United States of America. It's exciting for NASA. And here's the big reason why we're doing this with commercial crew. Because if we can drive down cost and commercialize low Earth orbit, we can go further. The President has put out Space Policy Directive 1, and he has said that we're going back to the moon. We're going back to the moon with international partners and commercial partners. We're going to utilize the resources of the moon, and this time, when we go to the moon, it's going to be sustainable. In other words, we're going to stay. And we're going to stay with robots and landers and rovers, and we're going to have humans going back and forth to the surface of the moon from what we call Gateway, which is, in essence, a space station in orbit around the moon in deep space. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening at NASA. And the people that are going to be on these missions, the people that are going to be flying them, that next generation of Neil Armstrongs and Buzz Aldrins, they're going to be with us here today. So let's bring out our astronaut candidates and let's get started. In fact, a lot of people around the country that are enamored with who you are and what you're going to do on behalf of the United States of America, on behalf of Canada, and in fact, on behalf of the world. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in this. Thank you for letting this audience love on you for a few minutes there. As you can see, a lot of enthusiasm. But go ahead, please have your seats. And I want to start. We'll start with Kayla, and we'll just go down the row. If each of you would take just a few moments, tell us what your name is, where you're from, and a little bit about your background, where you come from, and what got you to the point where you're ready to be an astronaut candidate. So Kayla, starting with you.
Thanks so much for having us here today, sir. It's an honor to be here. My name is Kayla Barron. My background is in the Navy. I served
Go Navy.
Yes, sir. Naval Academy class of 2010, and I served on submarines before coming to NASA. I'm from Washington State.
Awesome. Well, I can tell you, since I've been the NASA administrator, I've had a lot of debriefs from our astronauts who live and work on the International Space Station. I can tell, based on those debriefs, that your experience on submarines, living in close quarters with other people, is going to be very valuable going forward. So thank you for being here. All right.
I'm Zena Cardman. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, went to UNC Chapel Hill, and then Penn State for my PhD. I was a microbiologist studying mostly caves and the deep sea.
Fantastic.
I'm Raja Chari. I go by Grinder. I grew up in Iowa, and I went to the Air Force Academy and then MIT, and then was an Air Force test pilot before coming here to NASA.
So when you say you go by Grinder, you're, of course, a military pilot. That would be a call sign.
That would be my call sign, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Grinder.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, Matthew Dominick. I grew up in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. Went to the University of San Diego for electrical engineering. and went to Naval Postgraduate School as well, Naval Test Pilot.
Awesome.
Good morning. My name's Bob Hines. I grew up primarily in Pennsylvania, went to Boston University and the University of Alabama, was a Air Force test pilot. I actually worked at NASA as a research pilot for a few years before getting selected with this class.
Good morning, Woody Hoburg from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to MIT and UC Berkeley, and then spent a little bit of time at Boeing Commercial Airplanes before teaching for several years as an MIT engineering professor before getting selected.
Awesome.
Good morning, Jonny Kim. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I was an enlisted Naval Special Warfare operator, then went to the University of San Diego and Harvard Medical School, became a medical doctor before coming here.
So when you say Navy Special Warfare operator, most of us would know that as a Navy SEAL. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, awesome. Perfect.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. I'm Joshua Kutryk. I grew up on a cattle farm in Alberta, Canada. I studied mechanical engineering, and prior to coming here, I was an Air Force test pilot. Thanks for having us.
Good morning, I'm Jasmin Moghbeli, call sign Jaws. I grew up in Baldwin, New York on Long Island, studied at MIT and the Naval Postgraduate School, and prior to coming here, I was a Cobra pilot and test pilot for the United States Marine Corps.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Loral O'Hara, and I grew up in Sugar Land, Texas, and went to the University of Kansas and Purdue University. Before this, I was an engineer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution up in Massachusetts, where I worked on research, submarines, and robots.
Good morning. Frank Rubio from Miami, Florida. Graduated from West Point, 98. Go Army.
Go Army.
And prior to this, I was a Black Hawk pilot and then a family medicine physician working with 10th Special Forces Group before being selected.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Jenni Sidey. I'm a Canadian astronaut. I studied mechanical engineering at McGill University and then did my PhD at Cambridge University. Most recently, I was working as an engineering professor at the University of Cambridge, and I studied fire.
Hi, my name is Jessica Watkins. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. I studied at Stanford and UCLA as a geologist and did my research on Mars geology, most recently working on the Mars rover.
So Mars geology has got to be really hard, especially from planet Earth.
Yes, that's why I signed up for this job.
That's right. So we're going to try to make that job easier for you.
That sounds great, sir.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to that. So just so everybody knows kind of the rules of the road here, this is live on the NASA channel. It's also on social media. And there are people out there who might want to ask a question of one of these fabulous astronaut candidates. If you'd like to do that, you can send a tweet and use hashtag AskNASA. So use hashtag AskNASA, send a tweet, and we'll get you in the queue so that you can ask a question from one of our astronaut candidates. In the meantime, if you're in the audience here and you have a question, certainly think about what that question may be. We have folks here with some microphones. We'll get those microphones up to you, and you can ask direct questions of our astronaut candidates. So let's begin. I'll start with the first question, and I'll just start with you, Kayla, since you're front and left here, closest to me, so you're in the direct line of fire. What is something that has surprised you about NASA and or astronaut candidate training?
I think what surprised me the most about training so far, given that my background is in submarine warfare, not in aviation, is how much I've enjoyed flying in our training jet, the T-38. I wasn't sure how that would go for me, but I've really had a good time doing it, and I think I learned a lot from training in that environment.
That's fantastic. Now, in the T-38, does every astronaut become a pilot?
No, so the astronauts who have a background in military aviation before they come here, like many of our classmates do, they get certified to be a pilot in the front seat of a two-seat jet, and the rest of us learn how to fly in the back seat.
Okay.
And we use it as an analog for training in an environment that's actually risky. You're operating real equipment, and you have to learn how to communicate and cooperate with a teammate in order to stay safe and complete your mission.
That's fantastic. Now, let me ask you, did you fly at all, commercially or civilly when you were a submarine warfare officer?
No, I was just focused on learning how to operate a nuclear reactor and drive a boat operating under the sea. So that wasn't really my area of expertise, but I've had a lot of fun scratching the surface of that so far.
Well, that's fantastic. operating a nuclear reactor, that's a tough job, I can imagine, and I'm sure that that will serve you well living and working in space. So thank you.
I hope so. Yes, sir.
All
Thanks.
right. Zena?
Let's see. There are a lot of surprising things in a good way. I think one of the most surprising things to me has been how different every day of our training is. You might be in a class learning Russian 1 hour, and then the next hour you're walking to the airport to get in one of those T-38 jets. It's incredibly diverse, and it's really cool getting to do that alongside classmates who come from such diverse backgrounds.
Amazing. Good.
I think what's surprised me is the amount of people and dedication that support all the training things we do. So whether it's, we just recently had Kayla and I just had our first run at the NBL, and just the number of divers that are involved, all the people that show up to support that, whether it's doing space station simulators and having a whole team of people that are watching a control room for basically a full day just to support our individual training is amazing to me, and this really speaks volumes to the fact that every one of the agencies is so dedicated to us succeeding, but really the agency succeeding in the missions we've got coming forward. It blows my mind every time I walk in that I get paid to do this, and there's usually 10 or 20 other people there to help me improve and get the mission done. So that's been really cool to see.
So this is interesting because there's so many diverse backgrounds on this stage. And of course, when we think about the history of flying, a lot of people go back to Apollo or Gemini or Mercury. And in those missions, it was largely military aviators, of which, Raja, you are one. But now it's a very diverse kind of cadre of folks that we're looking for. And bringing it all together, tying it together in a way where you guys can work together and maximize the opportunities that we get from space is really amazing. And doing that starting in the training environment is impressive. So thank you for those amazing comments. We do have our first question from social media. So we'll go to the social media question. It is, what astronaut do you look up to the most and take inspiration from? And I'm going to open this up to the first person who's willing to raise their hand, and if not, I might end up diming somebody out. So, if you had to pick an astronaut that you look up to, who would that be?
Obviously, very very difficult question. To paraphrase, or a quote that typically goes with Newton, or not Newton, somebody smart. I think it was Newton, standing on the shoulders of. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and when I was on board. On board the USS Eisenhower, Neil Armstrong came out to visit, and I was most impressed with just how humble he was, and he was just, you could tell from interviews you've seen with him, he just was mission-oriented and just did his job quietly and respectfully, and I think he's a really a good pinnacle for this job to look up to.
That's amazing, and there's a new movie coming out about his life, which I have seen, and it's extremely moving for those who are interested in space and interested in the history. This is a movie about a person. It's a movie about a person's life. And I got to tell you, when the movie was over, I couldn't move. I just sat there, just kind of thinking about this person's life. So I think that's an amazing individual that you've just discussed, and the fact that you had the opportunity to meet him. Did you meet him when he was on the Ike? Did you get that chance?
Yes, sir. He came out with a couple other folks and came out to the Eisenhower while we were off the coast of Pakistan doing operations in Afghanistan.
Wow. And that shows you his dedication. Long after his military service was over, long after his NASA service was over, he was still focused on being involved in the lives of the people that were doing what he used to do. So that's man. Look at you now. Did you know then that this is what you wanted to do?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
But it still inspired you.
Oh yeah, huge inspiration. Is always just something in the distance that you knew maybe I'd have a chance to do that, but never really actually felt like I could be here on the stage right now.
Awesome. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll echo that. I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Armstrong at a Society of Experimental Test Pilots symposium several years ago, and same thing. His humility and acknowledgement of how many people, he was just the fortunate guy that got to be the first one on the moon, but his acknowledgement to the giant team that is NASA that got him there, and the industry behind it, it was his humility was just phenomenal and very inspiring. The other one that I would put at a close second would be John Young, who unfortunately passed away not too long ago. But his professionalism and his experience and his dedication to advancing human spaceflight was very inspirational as well.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned John Young. If I remember right, he was involved in Apollo, and he flew the space shuttle as well.
Yes, sir. Yeah, very broad experience, and so he got to walk on the moon and then flew the first space shuttle flight, which was actually my inspirational moment when I was a young kid, getting to watch STS-1 launch, and following that mission is really what kind of set my sights on this initially.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thank you guys for that. I was informed that we might have a question from the audience. Somebody want to raise their hand? We got microphones available. You have to both stand up and talk into the microphone.
What was your hardest part of your training? What was the hardest part of your training?
They probably have the hardest part coming up. But that's a good question because they've been through pretty tough stuff already.
That's a great question. I think I would probably list learning the Russian language first. We learn Russian because some of us may fly to the International Space Station where we work closely with our Russian partners there. And learning a new language as a 33-year-old adult is pretty difficult.
Try it as a 43-year-old adult.
More generally, it kind of reminds me of, I have a favorite quote. I don't know the quote verbatim, but I'll paraphrase. I think it's a Feynman quote. And he says, it's not that hard, but there's a lot of it. And I think that goes for our training as well. We just do such a diverse range of things, flying, being in the neutral buoyancy lab, learning a language, learning systems of various spacecraft. And it's just the range of everything we do.
Awesome. Others? Most difficult thing? Come on, somebody's got to have something difficult that they've done.
I'd have to echo what he said, that the breadth and not necessarily the depth of knowledge is maybe that deep, but just the wide breadth of knowledge that we need to know. Everything from Russian to the International Space Station to flying the T-38. There's something new every day. And recently, some of us have gone to train in the neutral buoyancy lab in the spacesuit. And I had my first run last week, and I found that to be one of the more physically challenging things, in that you have to, the mechanics of motion that we take for granted every day, as simple as lifting your arm up above your head, is completely different and foreign in that spacesuit. And I found that to be very challenging and humbling, and was a lot of fun.
Even for a Navy SEAL.
Even for a Navy SEAL.
Awesome. Well, good. I've got a question I'm going to ask myself, if that's all right. I'm going to take this little point of privilege, since this is my show, to ask a question. And Bob, I'm going to direct this to you because this is an important thing. A few minutes ago, we were meeting in another room, just getting to know each other a little better, and you presented me this patch. This is your class patch. So this patch represents all of you and what you're doing. And on this patch, my first reaction was, that's interesting. We're talking about astronaut candidates. We're talking about our brand new class of astronauts. And you give me a patch with a turtle on it. Share with me and the audience why this patch has a turtle on it.
Yes, sir. So during our announcement last summer, Vice President Pence came down and he helped introduce our class to the country. And during his speech, he told the story about a turtle on a fence post. And if you walk into a field and see a turtle on a fence post, you know it didn't get there by itself. And that certainly translates to every single one of us here. There is a huge support structure behind us, whether it be our spouses and our kids, our parents, our mentors, all that stuff. They all played a huge role in getting us to the point that we're at now. And so much like we were alluding to Neil Armstrong acknowledging the masses that were behind accomplishing that giant goal, we all have the same thing. We have a many people behind us that helped get us here. And so that's the class in front of us took that as an opportunity to name us the Turtles, and we've embraced it, and it's a nod to those that helped get us here.
Awesome. That's a wonderful story, and I think it's important. You know, we have here today not just the astronauts, but we have the newest class of flight directors. And we're going to do another show. They might not be ready for me to announce this, but we're going to do another show just like this one with the flight directors sitting in your seats. The reason being because they are just as critical to all of your missions as you are, as are so many others here at NASA, and in fact our contractors and our providers of services. And yet we want to be able to showcase the entire enterprise, and that at the end of the day, you are the ones that are taking on the most risk and putting yourselves out there. But there's an entire team of people behind you doing everything possible to make sure that you're safe and that you're prepared and that we're getting the absolute best discovery and science and exploration from what you're doing. And that is the history and tradition of NASA. So I love the story. I love the patch. I love that you guys are the Turtles, and I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so yeah. So we've got another question from social media. How is the current research in space helping you to prepare humans for a journey to Mars and beyond?
I'll take this one.
So for everybody, Jessica is the Mars geologist from planet Earth.
Yes, correct.
All right.
Yes, so I think there's actually a lot of different types of research that are going to be necessary to help prepare us for a journey to the moon or to Mars or wherever that destination might be. I think one big piece of that is sending robotics to these places. So both to the moon and to Mars, we have instruments that are in orbit, and then also the rover that I mentioned is providing us with an understanding of these bodies. First, finding a good place for us to go that has resources that we might be able to use. And is safe for us. Related to that is studying the radiation involved in the journey to, particularly to Mars, how we can mitigate that risk for us as humans. There's a lot of really great work being done on that at NASA, trying to figure that out. There's the engineering aspect as well, working on getting rockets prepared to get us to the moon and out to Mars and back. Is a big part of that, ideally. And yeah, so I think there's a lot that kind of goes into this big picture of human spaceflight. We kind of have touched on that, but we really are the tip of a really large iceberg. There's a lot of people putting a lot of time and energy into solving these tough problems to allow us to explore further.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful response to that important question. And a lot of things that NASA does that a lot of people don't see, but behind the scenes right now, we're developing technology. We've got amazing scientists and engineers that are, advancing solar electric propulsion, for example, to help us get to Mars with what's called the highest specific impulse possible. We want to be able to get there with propulsion we don't want to have to launch massive amounts of fuel into space to get to Mars. So solar electric propulsion can really help us get there faster. It can help us get there more efficiently without having to launch so much mass into space. We're also trying to figure out the physiology with the deep space radiation environment, the microgravity environment. On the International Space Station, even right now, we've got astronauts on the International Space Station. And of course, we've had astronauts there for 18 years now, which is an amazing achievement in itself with an international treaty. And our astronauts are demonstrating that humans can, in fact, live and work in space. There are no doubt challenges to human physiology, and we're learning what those are, and we're putting in place countermeasures for that activity. So there's a lot happening. What I think is important to note also is that the moon is actually an amazing proving ground. We can go to the moon. It's a 3-day journey home. We know in this room, because we're followers of the history, Apollo 13 which some call a disaster and others call an amazing success, it was possible to bring our astronauts home because it was a 3-day journey home. Had something like that happened on the way to Mars, it wouldn't have worked out. But in this particular case, the moon is an amazing proving ground to demonstrate the technologies, to reduce the risk, to prove everything we need to know about life and science and physiology so that we can ultimately make that journey to Mars. By the way, you mentioned robotics. And that's, again, we have learned so much. The United States is still the only country, and we've done it with international partners, but we're still the only country that has landed on the surface of Mars with landers and rovers. And now we've done it 7 times. And on November 26th, the Monday after Thanksgiving, we're landing on Mars for an 8th time with InSight, which as a geologist, I know you're going to be really interested in what comes from that. We're going to be able to get a 3D image of what the inside of Mars is like. We're going to study Mars quakes. How active is the geology? How often is it impacted with meteors and all of these kind of things that are going to be necessary, not just to understand the planet, but also to prepare for an eventual human landing, which a Mars geologist might be the right person to send on a journey to Mars. So a lot of really exciting things happening at NASA, and of course your insight there is critically valuable. So I'm going to go back to the audience. There has to be another person that's interested in asking. We've got a couple of young folks here, which I'm thrilled to see. And stand up, say what your name is, and then ask the question.
Hi, my name is Aaron. What excites you the most about going to space?
What excites you the most about going to space? Laurel?
I think the one thing, or one of the things that I'm most excited about is just getting to see the Earth from the unique perspective of being in space, where we can see it just all by ourselves out there in the vastness of space. Everybody on the planet, I think that would just be kind of an overwhelming feeling the first time that you see that and give you a really unique perspective on the world.
That's amazing. You know, looking back in history, this December 24th, on Christmas Eve this year, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo 8, which of course was the first time we orbited the moon. And we got pictures, for the first time in history, we got pictures of the Earth in its entirety from the vicinity of the moon. And of course that picture has now been, of course, Life magazine and pretty much every publication on the planet covered that, and it really changed the perspective of a lot of people as to, who we are as Earth. We're this pale blue dot in the middle of this ocean of darkness, and how important this planet is. So that's a wonderful response. Did you have a follow-up question? No? If there was somebody else. We'll go here first, and then back to you.
Hi, my name's Samiha, and what makes you want to be an astronaut? What drove you, what still drives you to become an astronaut?
Hi, Samiha. I'm Josh. Thank you for the question. I get asked this a lot, and when I think about it, if I think back to when I was your age, for example, I tell people that the one thing that I remember more than anything is just being super curious about everything, wanting to explore and look and go farther. And if there was something that I had never done and that I viewed as being very difficult to do, I wanted to go and try to do it, to see what I would learn about myself from doing it. And as I grew up, I developed other interests. I started to become really interested in flying, really interested in science, and then I got into test flying and all the rest of it. But really, the very first thing I think was just this overwhelming curiosity. And on a bigger scale, I think that's really important to us. It's really important to us as humans in the world that we engage in that we're constantly, redefining what the impossible is, pushing limits and looking further. And for me, that's where it started, and I think that's still a big part of why I'm here and why I'm excited to go to work every day. But good question.
I'm gonna dime out. Let's see, Jenny.
So I want to echo what Joshua said, in that curiosity is a big component and a big driver for what we do. It certainly was very motivating in my case as well. And spaceflight is really interesting in such that we know we're going to learn a lot. We don't necessarily know what we're going to learn. I mean, the technologies that come from the fundamental knowledge we gain from exploring are unknown.
Sometimes we learn how much we don't know.
Exactly. It's just this incredible, really a journey. And it's a really inspiring thing. So one of the things I'd be really excited about, adding to what Loral said as well, seeing the Earth from that perspective, it's also the excitement that comes with what you're going to learn. So that curiosity and I guess push to learn more is incredibly motivating, I think, for most of us.
You sound like a PhD.
I tried to hide it.
Frank, do you have something?
Sure, thanks, sir. I think, I mean, it's funny, we come from very different backgrounds, but I think many of us have similar personalities in that when we were young, we loved to explore, we loved to push ourselves still, and I think that drive is just deep within all of us, and it's neat to, really in our positions, what we do is we represent teams, we represent NASA, we represent our militaries, our schools, and because I think humanity is kind of driven by curiosity and the want to explore. And so to be able to represent that is a pretty neat privilege.
Okay, awesome. We're going to go to social media here real quick, and then I know we've got another question from the audience. Many of NASA astronaut candidates have military flight experience, but what other fields of study are essential for becoming an astronaut? Well, there's a very diverse group of backgrounds here.
So despite the fact that I'm actually one of those military aviators, I'd like to answer this question because this is such a diverse group, and we have so many people that have done interesting things that, you think of the first class of NASA astronauts, it was all military aviators, and I'm really glad we've moved away from that because, we've already heard from Jessica, Mars geologist. We've taken many courses in geology, and so applicable to, we're talking about exploring other bodies out other than Earth, and we've done a lot of analogs back and how that we can look at certain things on Earth and what does that tell us about what we're seeing on these other celestial bodies. Zena studied extremophiles. I would say more about it, but it's way above my head. But we're one of the most exciting things we talk about, the possibility of finding life somewhere outside of Earth, and I think those extremophiles would play into that. We've got Jonny and Frank, who are medical doctors. So much of what we're studying, especially when we talk about long-duration missions, is the medical effects on the body and the radiation, the psychological effects, all those things. Woody, Loral, anytime we've got a question on orbital mechanics or anything, we go to our resident expert Woody, and so many of these things. And Jonny said it earlier. We're studying such a diverse and broad range of things, and all of us have different backgrounds and different areas of expertise that we all need to pull together.
That's a great answer, and I'll just piggyback. You dimed out Zena and you dimed out Jesse, and I will just say, I've been the NASA administrator for 5 months now, and in this time, there have been so many discoveries that you alluded to about, is there life out there? We now know, just since I've been here, we now know that there's liquid water 1.5 kilometers under the surface of Mars. Well, that's a discovery we didn't know when I took the job, and it's funny to see the chief scientist at NASA run into my office and announce this, guess what we just found, and to know that there are going to be people. In fact, maybe the folks here taking those missions to learn even more with human exploration. We now know that there's complex organic compounds on the surface of Mars. Doesn't guarantee that there's life, but it increases the probability that there's life, which is another important discovery, again, just in my short 5 months here. And the idea that methane cycles on Mars perfectly correlate with the seasons of Mars. Again, doesn't guarantee life, but it increases the probability. So this diverse group of folks that is in this class is really going to have an opportunity to make amazing discoveries. And of course, if we're successful in your time at NASA, and I can't make any guarantees, some people are older than others, Bob. But it would be amazing if some of the people here were to make that first trip to Mars, and I think that's in the realm of possibility. We're going to the moon. We're going to retire this risk, and then we're gonna prove out the technologies and take Gateway. That first Gateway is about proving technology. The second Gateway is a deep space transport, and that could be our vehicle to get to Mars. So a lot of exciting things, and the backgrounds here are amazing. We had another question from the audience, I think, in the second row here.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I work for NASA CFO. So you guys are going to actually have an opportunity to do something that most people only get theoretically to do. What would you take with you to a desert island? So you're literally, there's no stowage place, and you really have to think hard about where you're going to take. Have you guys thought about that at all?
It's a good point.
I would take Woody Hoburg.
I think I'd take a long-range radio.
Yeah, I would just take a satellite phone.
In all seriousness, I mean, as we look towards the exploration missions, I mean, we've talked about it lots of times, but we are just the tip of an iceberg. So without the ability to communicate back with the team supporting us, I mean, yes, we have very diverse backgrounds, but any one of us on a spacecraft by ourselves would not last very long. So I think communication would be, to me, the most important thing to, to help with the journey and also to share that journey, but more importantly, just to stay alive on the journey, because there's probably a whole bunch of things on that spacecraft I'm going to need help with, or desert island. Like
all right, great answer. Did you have more? You can.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
I've had this question a lot, and the question is, how many applicants were there to be in your class? Does anybody here know that answer offhand?
I think it was somewhere around 18,000.
18,000 people applied for your job. And yet this group here was selected. And of course, this was kind of a new thing. Was there anybody on this stage that had applied for the astronaut corps previously? We've got a number of folks. How many times, if you don't mind me asking, how many times does it take? And just so you know, I have talked to astronauts that work here at the headquarters building that have said that they got accepted on their 8th application to be in the astronaut corps. That's how competitive it is, and it shows that this person was qualified, and still, as qualified as you are, it's still extremely difficult to get into the corps, and yet here you are. So if you don't mind, share the experience of the first application, second, third, or whatever, and then ultimately what it was like to finally get the yes. Anyone?
Well, I applied 3 times. The first, I started applying basically as soon as I was old enough. And the first time I applied, I was still in grad school, and I don't think I met the basic qualifications. But then, so this was my 3rd time applying, and I guess that's all I really.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Bob, did you have something?
Yes, sir. I think one of the unique things about the application process that we go through is we get to spend twice a full week with the other people that are also competing for the same job. And that's pretty unique, I think, to most any other job that's out there. And one of the things that our eyes are open to is the quality of the applicants that are coming in. I think most of us would agree that there are multitudes of other people that are just as or more qualified potentially than we are. So we're incredibly blessed and fortunate to have been selected by NASA on this. And we've really, we obviously enjoy it. We've got a great group dynamic, I think, with our group, and that's part of what goes into, I think, making a good cohesive class for us. To answer your question in the short version, I applied. This is my 3rd application, and I did not interview at all on either of the first 2. So it's an incredible experience to obviously go through that process, but it is very eye-opening. As many may or may not know, as fighter pilots, there tends to be a little bit of an ego that goes along with being a fighter pilot, but you roll into a group like this and you start realizing, I just fly airplanes.
Nice. Kayla, I want to bring you into the mix. You're a submariner, United States Navy, and we got a question from social media, which I think is interesting, about a lunar base. It asks, how would a lunar base or a colony affect the future of space travel? Have you had any thoughts about this? I know a submarine is different than a lunar base, but in some ways, they would be very similar.
I think, as you already pointed out, sir, the opportunity to work on the moon is a great proving ground for future exploration deeper in space. And I think there's a lot we can learn from operating in extreme environments. We're already doing that here on the surface of the Earth. Submarines are a reasonable analog, I think, for the types of stuff we do in space, but NASA also has a lot of really cool analog projects, including NEMO, which is an opportunity to live underwater in basically a submerged habitat and do scuba diving that kind of simulates doing a spacewalk to learn new things. And the lunar base kind of just takes that to the next level. It really would teach us a lot about how we need to operate when we're further from Earth, when we're further from our support team, and when we have fewer resources.
Awesome. I get this question a lot because people want to know, why are we going back to the moon? And of course, we've got geologists here as well. When you think back to the Apollo program, we landed 6 times on the surface of the moon with 12 people, and each time it was in that equatorial region of the moon. And when we think about Gateway and what it is, we're talking about a habitat in orbit around the moon, not on the surface of the moon, but in orbit. What the Gateway will allow us to do is have more access to more parts of the moon than ever before. So when we think back in history, we have not known, people have maybe thought about, speculated that there might be water ice on the surface of the moon. Well, we discovered in 2008 and in 2009 that there is water ice, and we discovered that there's hundreds of billions of tons of water ice on the surface of the moon. So that's one of the reasons. How would it affect the future of space travel? Water ice is life support, in situ resource utilization, utilizing the resources of the moon for life support. Water is, of course, there to drink. Ice, melt it, you got water. Crack it into hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen is necessary to breathe. And then, of course, hydrogen and oxygen, when put into cryogenic form, that's rocket propulsion. And some of you will be launching on the SLS rocket, which is a liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen rocket. So this is an important question, something we need to think about. We put a habitation on the surface of the moon. We're going to be able to get a lot more knowledge about the surface. 1969, we landed on the moon, and it took until 2009 before we knew that there were hundreds of billions of tons of water ice on the moon. How much do we still not know about the moon? Could there be, and I don't have an answer, nobody else does, but we know that there are rare earth metals that are extremely valuable. Well, those rare earth metals are asteroid impacts. They're not earth metals at all. Could there be those metals on the surface of the moon where there's not an active geology, where there's not an active hydrosphere, and would they be right where they impacted, a billion years ago or however long ago it might have been? So these are, I think, important questions about the surface of the moon and what comes next for the future of space exploration. I'm going to go to a question that I have here on a card. I mentioned SLS. We mentioned commercial crew going back and forth to the International Space Station on commercial rockets. Zena, I'm going to ask this question for you. When you think about what mission you'd like to be involved in, what do you think about? What would be your dream choice and why?
Gosh, that's a great question, and I think we all have the very corny, boring answer of, seriously, we would take anything, any mission.
Sure.
I think it's actually most exciting to me that you can even ask that question and that there are multiple options for us to choose from. That's a really amazing and exciting time to be a part of the space program. But to add on to that, I would go on any mission with any one of these turtles.
That's awesome. But you're right. The idea that we've got 2 different, very dissimilar designs with United Launch Alliance and Boeing and SpaceX launching to the International Space Station next year with humans, and at the same time we're building the largest rocket. We're talking about a rocket bigger than the Statue of Liberty. That's got to be intimidating. Not that the others aren't, but what an amazing opportunity in this country to have all of this under development, and now we're on the precipice of seeing it realized, and that some here might have the opportunity to do it. Anybody else want to weigh in on what you want to do? I know, Jesse, you want to go to Mars, so you're all about the SLS, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely take it. Yes, I just would piggyback on what Zena said. It's super exciting to have those opportunities actually on the horizon, and it's just because of all of the great work of the talented people at NASA that we're even able to ask that question.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yes, sir. I think I completely echo what Zena said. We would all take any mission and be really excited. I think as an engineer, the fact that we're building a new gateway out near the moon, I think the opportunity to be involved in constructing that is just incredibly exciting. So while I would take anything, that's the kind of thing out there that makes me say, wow, this is an amazing time to be here.
So you were the one they were teasing about, if we need information about orbital physics, they go to you? So maybe you can share for the audience what a near rectilinear halo orbit is? No, don't do that, unless you want to.
I can try. We actually had a good discussion about this at dinner last night.
Sounds riveting.
We are talking about putting this orbital gateway in a pretty interesting orbit out around. It's an orbit around the moon that has a lot of convenient properties. For example, it is easy to change the plane of that orbit if you compare it to, say, a circular orbit like low Earth orbit. And so that gives us a lot of interesting possibilities, like you were saying, sir, with going to different places if we do want to go down to the surface.
Yeah, no, that's right. So the idea behind the gateway, we think back to the Apollo era, we think about a command module. You think back to the Saturn rocket, that massive stack on the launch pad. What actually came back was just that little thing at the very top that had people on board. That was all that came back at the end of the day. Imagine an architecture, which we want to build, that is sustainable, where all the pieces of the architecture are reusable. So what the gateway represents is, in essence, a reusable command module that can go to different orbits around the moon. It can go to the L1 point, it can go to the L2 point. As you mentioned, you can change what that orbit is, which gives you more access to more parts of the moon than ever before to make those amazing discoveries. And so thrilled to have you involved in that activity. Get through candidate training, and I'm sure you'll be involved in all those kind of activities. Did you have something else? Okay. I know we had another question from the audience over here. I've got a lot of questions from the audience.
Good morning. If you were allowed one personal item to take into space to remind you of home, what would that be?
Thanks for the question. I give the same answer to this, and I really like it. At home, I have an old timepiece. It's mechanically wound, and it was built in, say, the late 1800s probably. And it came from my grandfather through father, and I still have that at home in my desk. And to be frank with you, it's amazing to me to sit and look at this and think that in the short time span of just those few generations, we're sitting here with these people today at NASA talking about actually going to the moon and beyond. Just something fundamentally amazing to think about, in terms of the pace of human innovation, in terms of what we can do when we come together and try to do it, and just in terms of how exciting the future is. So there's probably not wait for that, but if there was, that would be what I would take.
I think for me, if you ask any of my classmates, I really love pictures, which is, I'm always the one snapping pictures on all our trips. So, when I did my 3 deployments, I always carried in my flight suit a little book of pictures of my friends and family. And so I think I'd bring that.
No goldfish crackers?
Maybe some goldfish pretzels as well.
So Jasmin, remind me what you flew.
I flew Cobras, helicopters in the Marine Corps.
Okay. So you would take those pictures on deployments in the Cobra?
I would. I'd carry them in my flight suit pocket.
Fantastic.
Yes, sir.
We had some more questions here from the audience. No offense, but we'll start with the young folks, if that's all right.
My name is Jordan, and what was your first reaction when you got to NASA?
Hey, Jordan, thanks for that question. It's a great question. Honestly, so I had this whole speech prepared for saying, well, thank you for the opportunity. It's great that I made it that far, because I was convinced I wasn't going to get it. And so when I picked up the phone, and I actually happened to be at home over lunch, and my wife was there, and so it was a complete shock. And I know that sounds trite, but it really you just never expect to get it. And again, I'm not that emotional of a person, but I started crying. And it was just one of those like, what's going on? Like, what are these things on my face? And, just a little bit. There wasn't like lots of crying. But yeah, it was just that overwhelming excitement that I was just kind of shocked by. So.
I would add to that, I think the class has covered really thoroughly how we all feel about how competitive the process is, how amazing all of the other candidates for this job were, and how lucky we are to be here. But one note I want to add, especially for you guys visiting, thinking about what you might want to do going forward as middle schoolers. I think that's when a lot of us started to think about what we wanted to be when we grew up in a serious way. And for me, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I wanted to be a naval officer. It wasn't super specific. I didn't realize I wanted to be an astronaut until a few years ago. And I've had some amazing mentors in my life along the way see something in me before I even saw it in myself. That's what caused me to want to go to the Naval Academy, to go to grad school, to be a submariner, and to apply to be an astronaut. And so these big things that seem really intimidating, like whoever gets to do that could never be me. I think we all sometimes have those doubts, but the important thing is the advice I got from my last boss, Admiral Carter, who works at the Naval Academy, was if you want to be an astronaut, you apply. And if you don't apply, you can't be one. So for a lot of us, talking about the number of times we applied to be here, or whether it was our first time or not, if you don't go for it, you'll never get the call. And I think the flight directors probably feel the same way. I don't know the exact numbers, so they'll, I'm sure, upgrade me later, but there's actually been far fewer flight directors than there are astronauts. And it's a big thing to put yourself out there and ask to do something big, but if you don't do it, you'll never get the chance.
It's amazing. Awesome. Anybody else? Go ahead.
So I'd say, as Frank and Kayla have said, a wide range of emotions when I found out. Certainly an overwhelming feeling of excitement, and this amazing opportunity to have a platform as big as NASA to contribute to the advancement of our species. But I would say there's one emotion that I wasn't expecting, and it was, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but maybe a little bit of guilt, because as Bob had said, during the selection process, you're embedded with amazing people who can do just as good, if not better, of a job than you. And knowing that this is a dream that's shared by thousands of people, and we're just the lucky ambassadors that had the opportunity to fulfill this mission. So I think that was an emotion I wasn't expecting.
That's an amazing perspective. The idea is you go through this process, you get to know people, and not everybody's going to make it, and you know that going in. And then when that day comes when you get selected and your buddies don't, that's a perspective that I have not heard and is important.
I think the best way we can pay that back is just to remember that and do the best job we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonny, for that important answer. All right, we're going to go to a final question here on social media. We have time for maybe one answer on this. So if you really have a good answer or you want to be the person, go ahead and make it known. If not, I'm going to dime somebody out. So here we go. What research do you hope to be involved with in microgravity that will help us help us on Earth?
I'll take that.
Zena.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the most exciting parts of being involved in the space program is getting to do research that helps Earth as a whole. Everything from how do we combat bone density loss to how do we prevent the effects of radiation, to how do we do really efficient wastewater recycling. And every technology that we develop for space exploration has some application back here on Earth. And to be a part of a research project that's so much bigger than any of the research I did as an individual before, that's a treat. It's amazing.
That's awesome. There's a lot of things that really have very little to do with space exploration at all that would have benefits on Earth. And I was talking to a gentleman just a few months ago who owns and operates a company that is doing research on the International Space Station. They're using adult stem cells to print in 3D human organs that will be used on Earth. Now, all of this is very experimental, but they're highly confident that this is going to be a game changer. You can do things in a microgravity environment, in a zero gravity environment that you can't do on Earth. And for some of the scientists that are here to be able to participate in those kind of activities that will transform the human condition on Earth. And of course, that's what NASA has been doing from the beginning with all of our activities, from Earth science to planetary science and heliophysics, astrophysics. It really has been amazing. So we're going to close here, Zena. Thank you for that wonderful answer. I just want to get a show of hands, if you're willing. Raise your hand if you're interested in going to the moon or Mars. Look at these young folks. What are you guys worried about? Some of you are like, no, I don't want to touch that. I think it's cool they're going, but I don't want to. And that's perfectly okay, because guess what? They need people to help them on the ground as well. So, yeah, I see you raising your hand enthusiastically. You're ready to go, huh? Yeah, oh yeah. But that's okay. Here's what we're going to do. We got to close out this show. And I just want to say thank you to the audience, both online and on NASA TV, and the audience that showed up here today. Thank you all for participating. I think this has been a great opportunity to get to know some of America's proudest, some of Canada's proudest, so we can prepare for the next step, the next generation of what the United States and Canada, and in fact all of our international partners, are about to do in space. So thank you for participating. Thank you to the astronaut candidates. We are going to anxiously anticipate, looking forward to you not just being astronaut candidates, but no kidding, doing your missions, and we're going to be following you all along the way. So thank you so much for participating. Thank you for watching Watch This Space. I'm the NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.